chapter 6. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. And that's written by Thomas Paine. You've heard of that name before, haven't you? Thomas Paine. Yeah. It was the night after Hendrick was kicked out that I reached my lowest slump at Camp Curry. So Hendrick got his 10 lashes, and then he got dishonorably discharged. I couldn't sleep, and you have to have been through boot camp to understand just how far down a recruit has to sink before that can happen. Remember how he was saying how easy it was for him to sleep? But I hadn't had any real exercise all day, so I wasn't physically tired, and my shoulder still hurt, even though I had been marked duty. And I had that letter from my mother preying on my mind, and every time I closed my eyes, I would hear that crack and see Ted slump against the whipping post. I wasn't fretted about losing my boot chevrons. That no longer mattered at all because I was ready to resign. Determined to. If it hadn't been the middle of the night and no pen and paper handy, I would have done so right then. Ted had made a bad mistake, one that lasted all of half a second, and it really had been just a mistake too, because while he hated the outfit, who liked it, he had been trying to sweat it out and win his franchise. He meant to go into politics. He talked a lot about how when he got his citizenship, there will be some changes made. You wait and see. Well, he would never be in public office now. He had taken his finger off his number for a single instant, and he was through. If it could have happened to him, it could happen to me. Suppose I slipped next day or next week, not even allowed to resign, but drummed out with my back striped. Time to admit that I was wrong and Father was right. Time to put in that little piece of paper and slink home and tell Father that I was ready to go to Harvard and then go to work in the business, if he'd still let me. Time to see Sergeant Zim first thing in the morning and tell him that I had had it. But not until morning, because you don't wake Sergeant Zim except for something you're certain he will class as an emergency. Believe me, you don't. Not Sergeant Zim. Sergeant Zim. He worried me as much as Ted's case did. After court-martial was over and Ted had been taken away, he stayed behind and said to Captain Frankel, "May I speak with the battalion commander, sir?" "Certainly. I was intending to ask you to stay behind for a word. Sit down." Zim flicked his eyes my way, and the captain looked at me, and I didn't have to be told to get out. I faded. There was nobody in the outer office, just a couple of civilian clerks. I didn't dare go outside because the captain might want me. I found a chair back a row of files and sat down. I could hear them talking. Through the partition, I had my head against. So he's kind of eavesdropping, but his job is still to be available for the commander. Battalion headquarters was a building rather than a tent, since it housed permanent communication and recording equipment. But it was a minimum field building. A shack, really. The inner partitions weren't much. I doubt if the civilians could hear, as they each were wearing transcriber phones, like headphones, right? And were bent over typers. What do you think a typer is? A keyboard, right? They're typing. Okay. Yeah. Besides, they didn't matter. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. Well, maybe I did. Zim said, "Sir, I request transfer to a combat team." Frankel answered, "I can't hear you, Charlie. My tin ear is bothering me again." Zim, "I'm quite serious, sir. This isn't my sort of duty." Frankel said testily, "Quit belly-aching your troubles to me, Sergeant. At least wait until we've disposed of duty matters. What in the world happened?" Zim said stiffly, "Captain, that boy doesn't rate 10 lashes. Frankel answered, "Of course he doesn't. You know who goofed, and so do I." "Yes, sir, I know." "Well, you know even better than I do that these kids are wild animals at this stage. You know when it's safe to turn your back on them and when it isn't. You know the doctrine and the standing orders about Article 9080. You must never give them a chance to violate it. If they weren't aggressive, they wouldn't be material for the mobile infantry. They're docile in ranks. It's safe enough to turn your back when they're eating or sleeping or sitting on their tails and being lectured, but get them out in the field in a combat exercise or anything that gets them keyed up and full of adrenaline. You know that. Hold on, I skipped a line. Full of adrenaline, and they're as explosive as a hat full of mercury fulminate. You know that. All you instructors know that. You're trained to watch for it, trained to snuff it out before it happens. Explain to me how it was possible for an untrained recruit to hang a mouse on your eye. He should never have laid a hand on you. You should have knocked him cold when you saw what he was up to. So why weren't you on the bounce? Are you slowing down? I don't know, Zim answered slowly. I guess I must be. If true, a combat team is the last place for you. But it's not true. Or it wasn't true the last time you and I worked out together 3 days ago. So what slipped? Zim was slow in answering. I think I had him tagged in my mind as one of the safe ones. There are no such. Yes, sir. But he was so earnest, so doggedly determined to sweat it out. He didn't have any aptitude, but he kept on trying. That I must have done that subconsciously. Zim was silent, then added, I guess it was because I liked him. Frankel snorted. An instructor can't afford to like a man. I know it, sir, but I do. They're such a nice bunch of kids. We've dumped all the real twerps by now. Hendrick's only shortcoming, aside from being clumsy, was that he knew all the answers. I didn't mind that. I knew it all at that age myself. The twerps had gone home, and those that are left are eager, anxious to please, and on the bounce. As cute as a litter of collie pups. A lot of them will make soldiers. So that was the soft spot. You liked him, so you failed to clip him in time. So he winds up with a court and the whip and a bad conduct discharge. Real sweet. Zim said earnestly, I wish to heaven there were some way for me to take that flogging myself, sir. You'd have to take your turn. I outrank you. What do you think I've been wishing the past hour? What do you think I was afraid of from the moment I saw you come in here sporting a shiner? I did my best to brush it off with administrative punishment, and the young fool wouldn't let well enough alone. But I never thought he'd be crazy enough to blurt it out that he'd hung one on you. He's stupid. You should have eased him out of the outfit weeks ago, instead of nursing him along until he got into trouble. But blurt it out he did, to me, in front of witnesses, forcing me to take official notice of it, and that licked us. No way to get it off the record, no way to avoid a court. Just go through the whole dreary mess and take our medicine, and wind up with one more civilian who will be against us the rest of his days. Because he has to be flogged. Neither you nor I can take it for him, even though the fault was ours, because the regiment has to see what happens when 9080 is violated. Our fault, but his lumps. My fault, Captain. That's why I want to be transferred. Sir, I think it's best for the outfit. You do, eh? But I decide what's best for my battalion, not you, Sergeant. Charlie, who do you think pulled your name out of the hat, and why? Think back 12 years. You were a corporal, remember? Where were you? Here, as you quite well know, Captain. Right here on this same godforsaken prairie, and I wish I had never come back to it. Don't we all? But it happens to be the most important and most delicate work in the Army, turning unspanked young cubs into soldiers. Who is the worst unspanked young cub in your section? Zim answered slowly. I wouldn't go so far as to say you were the worst, Captain. You wouldn't, eh? But you'd have to think hard to name another candidate. I hated your guts, Corporal Zim. Zim sounded surprised, a little hurt. You did, Captain? I didn't hate you. I rather liked you. So? Well, hate is the other luxury an instructor can never afford. We must not tolerate them. We must not hate them. We must not like them. We must teach them. But if you liked me then, it seemed to me you had a rather strange way of showing it. Do you still like me? Don't answer that. I don't care whether you do or not, or rather, I don't want to know, whichever it is. Never mind. I despised you then, and I used to dream about ways to get you. But you were always on the bounce and never gave me a chance to buy a 9080 cord of my own. So here I am, thanks to you. Now to handle your request. You used to have one order that you gave me over and over when I was a boot. I got so I loathed it almost more than anything else you did or said. Do you remember it? I do, and now I'll give it back to you. Soldier, shut up and soldier. It's a good spot to stop. Top 86. If you need a book, grab a book. If you don't want to read along, guys, I recommend if you can read along, you do so. Grant, is it possible that occasionally I will read a sentence not exactly the same way you would read the sentence? Is it possible that sometimes I would read it right and you would read it wrong, or vice versa? So if we're both reading it, okay, me reading out loud, you reading silently, if I make a mistake, could you say, whoa, I think you might have read that wrong? And would that help me? And everybody else? Could occasionally you have been like, oh, he read it different than I would have, but I think that makes more sense. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we were on page 86. When I say things about being quiet or whatever, I mean like it'd be nice. What? What do you want?
I say I liked your shirt.
I don't.
You don't like my shirt, or you don't like your shirt?
I don't like my shirt.
I like it.
It's too tight on the neck. And it looks like absolute garbage. But it's free. You think it'd be a good idea for your teacher to come in with daggone cut off sleeves? Yes, sir. Don't go yet. This weary mess isn't all loss. Any regiment of boots needs a stern lesson in the meaning of 9080, as we both know. They haven't yet learned to think. They won't read. And they rarely listen, but they can see. And young Hendrick's misfortune may save one of his mates one day by swinging by the neck until dead. But I'm sorry the object lesson had to come from my battalion. And I certainly don't intend to let this battalion supply another one. So you get your instructors together and warn them. For about 24 hours, those kids will be in a state of shock. Then they'll turn sullen, and the tension will build. Along about Thursday or Friday, some boy who is about to flunk out anyhow will start thinking over the fact that Hendrick didn't get so much. Not even the number of lashes for drunk driving. And he's going to start brooding that it might be worth it to take a swing at an instructor he hates worst. Sergeant, that blow must never land. Understand me? Yes, sir. I want them to be 8 times as cautious as they have been. I want them to keep their distance. I want them to have eyes in the backs of their heads. I want them to be as alert as a mouse at a cat show. Bronsky. You have a special word with Bronsky. He has a tendency to fraternize. To fraternize means to get friendly and like have a friendly relationship with someone. He's saying these instructors can't be friends with the instructees. That's when they'll get careless. Something bad will happen. I'll straighten Bronsky out, sir. See that you do, because when the next kid starts swinging, it's got to be stop punched, not muffed like today. The boy has got to be knocked cold, and the instructor must do so without ever being touched himself, or I'll damned well break him for incompetence. Let them know that. They've got to teach these kids that it's not merely expensive, but impossible to violate 9080. Not even trying it wins that even trying it wins a short nap, a bucket of water in the face, and a very sore jaw, nothing else. Yes, sir, it'll be done. It had better be done. I will not only break the instructor who slips, I'll personally take him way out on the prairie and give him lumps. Because I will not have another one of my boys strung up to that whipping post through sloppiness on the part of his teachers. Dismissed. Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Captain. What's good about it? Charlie. Yes, sir. If you're not too busy this evening, why don't you bring your soft shoes and your pads over to the officers' row, and we'll go waltzing, Matilda? Say about 8 o'clock. Yes, sir. That's not an order. It's an invitation. If you really are slowing down, maybe I'll be able to kick your shoulder blades off. Oh, would the captain care to put a small bet on it? Huh? With me sitting here at this desk getting swivel chair spread? I will not. Not unless you agree to fight with 1 foot in a bucket of cement. Seriously, Charlie, we've had a miserable day, and it's going to be worse before it gets better. If you and I work up a good sweat and swap a few lumps, maybe we'll be able to sleep tonight despite all of Mother's little darlings. I'll be there, Captain. Don't eat too much dinner. I need to work off a couple of matters myself. I'm not going to dinner. I'm going to sit right here and sweat out this quarterly report, which the regimental commander is graciously pleased to see right after his dinner, and which somebody whose name I won't mention has put me 2 hours behind on. He's talking about Zim, right? He's been talking to Zim for a while. So I may be a few minutes late for our waltz. Go away now, Charlie, and don't bother me. See you later. Sergeant Zim left so abruptly that I barely had time to lean over and tie my shoe to thereby be out of sight behind a file case as he passed through the outer office. Captain Frankel was already shouting, "Orderly! Orderly! Orderly! Do I have to call you 3 times? What's your name? Put yourself down for an hour's extra duty, full kit. Find the company commanders of Echo, Foxtrot, and Golf. My compliments, and I'll be pleased to see them before parade. Then bounce over to my tent and fetch me a clean dress uniform, cap, sidearms, shoes, ribbons, no medals. Lay it out for me here. Then make afternoon sick call if you can. If you can scratch with that arm, as I've seen you doing, your shoulder can't be too sore. You've got 13 minutes until sick call. On the bounce, soldier." I made it by catching 2 of them in the senior instructor's shower. An orderly can go anywhere. And the 3rd at his desk. The orders you get aren't impossible. They merely seem so because they nearly are. I was lying out Captain Frankel's uniform for parade as sick call sounded. Without looking up, he growled, "Belay that! Extra duty! Dismissed!" So I got home just in time to catch extra duty for uniform untidy in to particulars, and see the sickening end of Ted Hendricks' time in the mobile infantry. So I had plenty to think about as I lay awake that night. I had known that Sergeant Zim worked hard, but it had never occurred to me that he could possibly be other than completely and smugly self-satisfied with what he did. He looked so smug, so self-assured, so at peace with the world and with himself. The idea that this invincible robot could feel that he had failed, could feel so deeply and personally disgraced that he wanted to run away, hide his face among strangers, and offer the excuse that his leaving would be best for the outfit, shook me up as much, and in a way even more than seeing Ted flogged. To have Captain Frankel agree with him as to the seriousness of the failure, I mean, and then rub his nose in it, chew him out. Well, I mean, really, sergeants don't get chewed out. Sergeants do the chewing. It's a law of nature. But I had to admit that what Sergeant Zim had taken and swallowed was so completely humiliating and withering as to make the worst I had ever heard or overheard from a sergeant sound like a love song. And yet the captain hadn't even raised his voice. The whole incident was so preposterously unlikely that I was never even tempted to mention it to anyone else. And Captain Frankel himself, officers we didn't see very often. They showed up for evening parades, sauntering over at the last moment and doing nothing that would work up a sweat. They inspected once a week, making private comments to sergeants, comments that invariably meant grief for somebody else, not them. And they decided each week what company had won the honor of guarding the regimental colors. Aside from that, they popped up occasionally on surprise inspections, creased, immaculate, remote, and smelling faintly of cologne, and went away again. Oh, one or more of them did always accompany us on route marches, and twice Captain Frankel had demonstrated his virtuosity at Le Savate. But officers didn't work, not real work. And they had no worries because sergeants were under them, not over them. But it appeared that Captain Frankel worked so hard that he skipped meals, was kept so busy with something or other that he complained of lack of exercise and would waste his own free time just to work up a sweat. As for worries, he had honestly seemed to be more upset at what had happened to Hendrik than Zim had been. And yet he hadn't even known Hendrik by sight. He had been forced to ask his name. I had an unsettling feeling that I'd been completely mistaken as to the very nature of the world I was in. As if every part of it was something wildly different from what it appeared to be. Like discovering your own mother isn't anyone you've ever seen before, but a stranger in a rubber mask. How many of you have reached a place in your life, maybe more than once, where something is revealed to you and it completely changes your outlook on the world you live in? It's like the movie The Wizard of Oz, when they finally pull back the curtain and they're like, whoa, wait a minute. Kind of shakes you, right? Johnny's being shaken right now. He thought the officers were just all hoity-toits off doing nothing, and that the sergeants, just boss them around because they felt like it's not that at all. But I was sure of one thing. I didn't even want to find out what the mobile infantry really was. If it was so tough that even the gods that be, sergeants and officers, were made unhappy by it, it was certainly too tough for Johnny. How could you keep from making mistakes in an outfit you didn't understand? I didn't want to swing by my neck till I was dead. I didn't even want to risk being flogged. Even though the doctor stands by to make certain that it doesn't do any permanent damage or injury, nobody in our family had ever been flogged, except paddlings at school, of course, which isn't at all the same thing. There were no criminals in our family on either side. None who had even been accused of a crime. We were a proud family. The only thing we lacked was citizenship, and Father regarded that as no real honor, a vain and useless thing. But if I were flogged, well, he'd probably have a stroke. And yet Hendrik hadn't done anything that I hadn't thought about doing 1,000 times. Why hadn't I? Timid, I guess. I knew that those instructors, any one of them, could beat the tar out of me, so I had buttoned my lip and hadn't tried it. No guts, Johnny. At least Ted Hendrik had guts. I didn't have. And a man with no guts has no business in the Army in the first place. Besides that, Captain Frankel hadn't even considered it to be Ted's fault. Even if I didn't buy a 9080 through lack of guts, what day would I do something other than a 9080, something not my fault, and wind up slumped against the whipping post anyhow? Time to get out, Johnny, while you're still ahead. My mother's letter simply confirmed my decision. I had been able to harden my heart to my parents as long as they were refusing me, but when they softened, I couldn't stand it. Or when my mother softened, at least, she had written, and now we finally get to hear what she wrote in that letter. that made him so upset. She said other things, and then, but I'm afraid I must tell you that your father will still not permit your name to be mentioned. But dearest, that is his way of grieving, since he cannot cry. You must understand, my darling baby, that he loves you more than life itself, more than he does me, and that you have hurt him very deeply. He tells the world that you are a grown man, capable of making your own decisions, and that he is proud of you. But that is his own pride speaking, the bitter hurt of a proud man who has been wounded deep in his heart by the one he loves best. You must understand, Juanito. So his name's Johnny, but probably his real name is Juanito. That he does not speak of you and has not written to you because he cannot, not yet, not till his grief becomes bearable. When it has, I will know it, and then I will intercede for you, and we will all be together again. Myself, how could anything her baby boy does anger his mother? You can hurt me, but you cannot make me love you the less. Wherever you are, whatever you choose to do, you are always my little boy who bangs his knee and comes running to my lap for comfort. My lap has shrunk, or perhaps you have grown, though I have never believed it. But nonetheless, it will always be waiting when you need it. Little boys never get over needing their mother's laps, do they, darling? I hope not. I hope that you will write and tell me so. But I must add that, in view of the terribly long time that you have not written, it is probably best, until I let you know otherwise, for you to write to me care of your Aunt Eleonora. She will pass it on to me at once and without causing any more upset. You understand? 1,000 kisses to my baby, your mother. So she's saying, obviously she wants him to write, but if you're going to write, send it through your aunt, because if your father sees it, it's just going to upset him even more. He says, I understand all right, and if father could not cry, I could. So after reading this letter, he may be shedding a tear or two. He says, I did. And at last, I got to sleep. Anybody ever have something on their mind that's like hard, like emotional, and until you cry, you can't go to sleep? And once you have cried a little bit, then you're able to just, like, it's okay. I remember, not a long time, but I remember that happening a couple times in my life. And by golly, you feel better after just letting it out. Good. And you're a real man if you don't cry. Good. All right. And at last I could go to sleep and was awakened at once by an alert. We bounced out to the bombing range, the whole regiment, and ran a simulated exercise without ammo. We were wearing full unarmored kit otherwise, including earplug receivers, and we had no more than extended when the word came to freeze. So they start in formation, right, and they extend out to form some sort of a firing line or whatever formation they're using. And they got the order to freeze. You remember that's how Hendrik got busted, right? Because he didn't freeze. And I mean, we held it, barely breathing. A mouse tiptoeing past would have sounded noisy. Something did go past and ran right over me. A coyote, I think. I never twitched. We got awfully cold holding that freeze, but I didn't care. I knew it was my last. So he's still bound and determined to do what? Resign, quit. And his mother's letter made him soften to his parents, like he needs to go home. He's feeling like he needs to go home. I didn't even hear reveille the next morning. For the first time in weeks, I had to be whacked out of my sack and barely made formation for morning jerks. There was no point in trying to resign before breakfast anyhow, since I had to see Zim at the first step. But he wasn't at breakfast. I did ask Bronsky's permission to see the company commander, and he said, sure, help yourself. And he didn't ask me why. But you can't see a man who isn't there. We started a route march after breakfast, and I still hadn't laid eyes on him. It was an out and back with lunch fetched out to us by copter, an unexpected luxury. since failure to issue field rations before marching usually meant practice starvation, except for whatever you had caught. And I hadn't. Too much on my mind. Sergeant Zim came out with the rations, and he held mail call in the field, which was not an unexpected luxury. I'll say this for the MI. They might chop off your food, water, sleep, or anything else without warning, but they never held up a person's mail a minute longer than circumstances required. You okay? Okay. That was yours, and they got it to you by the first transportation available, and you could read it at your earliest break, even on maneuvers. This hadn't been too important for me, as aside from a couple of letters from Carl, I hadn't had anything but junk mail until Mother wrote to me. I didn't even gather around when Zim handed it out. I figured, now on, not speaking to him until he... Whoa, I need to start over. I didn't even gather around when Zim handed out. So Zim's handing the mail out. He didn't bother coming over. I figured, now on, not speaking to him until he got in. No point in giving him reason to notice me until we were actually in reach of headquarters. So I was surprised when he called my name and held up a letter. I bounced over and took it, and was surprised again. It was from Mr. Dubois, my high school instructor in history and moral philosophy. I would sooner have expected a letter from Santa Claus. Then, when I read it, it still seemed like a mistake. I had to check the address and the return address to convince myself that he had written it and had meant it for me. It said, "My dear boy, I would have written to you much sooner to express my delight." Are you okay?
I'm great.
Okay. I would have written to you much sooner to express my delight and my pride in learning that you had not only volunteered for service, but also had chosen my own service. But not to express surprise. It is what I expected of you, except possibly the additional and very personal bonus that you chose the MI. This is a sort of consummation which does not happen too often, that nevertheless makes all of a teacher's efforts worthwhile. We necessarily sift a great many pebbles, much sand for each nugget, but the nuggets are the reward. He's calling Johnny the nugget, right? He's saying, you're what teachers work for. By now, the reason I did not write at once is obvious to you. Many young men, not necessarily through any reprehensible fault, are dropped during recruit training, and I have waited, I have kept in touch through my own connections, until you had sweated it out, past the hump. How well we all know the hump, and were certain, barring accidents or illness, of completing your training and your term. You are now going through the hardest part of your service. Not the hardest physically, though physical hardship will never trouble you again. You now have its measure. But the hardest spiritually, the deep soul-turning readjustments and reevaluations necessary to metamorphose a potential citizen into one in being. Or rather, I should say, you've already gone through the hardest part. Despite all the tribulations you still have ahead of you and all the hurdles, each higher than the last, which you must still clear. But it is that hump that counts. And knowing you, lad, I know that I have waited long enough to be sure that you are past your hump, or you would be home now. When you reached that spiritual mountaintop, you felt something, a new something. Perhaps you haven't the words for it. I know I didn't when I was a boot. So perhaps you will permit an older comrade to lend you the words, since it often helps to have discreet words. Simply this: the noblest fate that a man can endure is to place his own mortal body between his loved home and the war's desolation. The words are not mine, of course, as you will recognize. Basic truths cannot change, and once a man of insight expresses one of them, it is never necessary, no matter how much the world changes, to reformulate them. This is an immutable true everywhere throughout all time for all men and all nations. Let me hear from you, please, if you can spare an old man some of your precious sack time to write an occasional letter. And if you should happen to run across any of my former mates, give them my warmest greetings. Good luck, trooper. You've made me proud. Signed, Jean V. Dubois, Lieutenant Colonel, Mobile Infantry, retired. The signature was as amazing as the letter itself. Old Sourmouth was a short colonel? Why, our regional commander was only a major. Mr. Dubois had never used any sort of rank around school. We had supposed, if we'd thought about it at all, that he must have been a corporal or some such who had been let out when he lost his hand and had been fixed up with a soft job teaching, a course that didn't even have to be passed or taught, just audited. Of course, we had known that he was a veteran, since history and moral philosophy must be taught by a citizen. But a mobile infantryman? He didn't look it. Prissy, faintly scornful. A dancing master type, not one of us apes. But that was the way he had signed himself. I spent the whole long hike back to camp thinking about that amazing letter. It didn't sound in the least like anything he had ever said in class. Oh, I don't mean it contradicted anything he had told us in class. It was just entirely different in tone. Since when does a short colonel call a recruit private comrade? So, briefly, if I may, I taught out in Graves County a junior guard program out there, the real junior guard program, and some of my students ended up in my unit after they had graduated high school, and the relationship changes, right? You go from being their teacher to now. I mean, I was still in a leadership position over them, so it didn't change a lot. But over the years, it did end up, because you'd known them for a lot longer on a professional level, and then you get to know like their young family is starting to form. It's just different. So their dynamic has changed, right? Their relationship is completely different now. When he was playing Mr. Dubois, and I was one of the kids who had to take his course, he hardly seemed to see me, except once, when he got me sore by implying that I had too much money and not enough sense. So my old man could have bought the school and given it to me for Christmas. Is that a crime? It was none of his business. He had been droning along about value, comparing the Marxist theory with the orthodox use theory. Mr. Dubois had said, of course, the Marxian definition of value is ridiculous. All the work one cares to add will not turn a mud pie into an apple tart. It remains a mud pie, value zero. By corollary, unskillful work can easily subtract value. An untalented cook can turn wholesome dough and fresh green apples, valuable already, into an inedible mess, value zero. Has anybody ever tried to make something out of perfectly good ingredients and then they made it so you couldn't even eat it? No? Has anybody, you have? You don't fail? Yeah, you're a man and you don't fail. I got it. That's good. Conversely, a great chef can fashion of those same materials a confection of greater value than a commonplace apple tart, with no more effort than an ordinary cook uses to prepare an ordinary sweet. These kitchen illustrations demolish the Marxian theory of value, the fallacy from which the entire magnificent fraud of communism derives, and illustrate the truth of the common sense definition as measured in terms of use. You guys learned about communism a little bit this year, didn't you? Dubois had waved his stump at us. Nevertheless, wake up back there. Nevertheless, the disheveled old mystic of Das Kapital, turgid, tortured, confused, and neurotic, unscientific, illogical, this pompous fraud, Karl Marx, nevertheless, had a glimmering of a very important truth. Are we playing drums with the calculator? If he had possessed an analytical mind, he might have formulated the first adequate definition of value. And this planet might have been saved endless grief. Or might not, he added. You. I sat up with a jerk. If you can't listen, perhaps you can tell the class whether value is a relative or an absolute. I had been listening, I just didn't see any reason not to listen with my eyes closed and spine relaxed. But his question caught me out. I hadn't read that day's assignment. An absolute, I answered, guessing. Wrong, he said coldly. Value has no meaning other than in relation to living beings. The value of a thing is always relative to a particular person, is completely personal and different in quantity for each living human. Market value is a fiction, merely a rough guess at the average of personal values, all of which must be quantitatively different or trade would be impossible. I had wondered what Father would have said if he had heard market value called a fiction. Snorting disgust, probably. This very personal relationship, value, has two factors for a human being. First, what can he do with a thing? It's use to him. Second, what he must do to get it. Its cost to him. There's an old song which asserts the best things in life are free. Not true. Utterly false. This was the tragic fallacy which brought on the decadence and collapse of the democracies of the 20th century. Those noble experiments failed because the people had been led to believe that they could simply vote for whatever they wanted and get it without toil, without sweat, without tears. Nothing of value is free. Even the breath of life is purchased at birth only through gasping effort and pain. He had been still looking at me and added, if you boys and girls had to sweat for your toys the way a newborn baby had to struggle to live, you'd be much happier and richer. As it is with some of you, I pity the poverty of your wealth. I've just awarded you the prize for a 100-meter dash. Does it make you happy? I suppose it would. No dodging, please. You have the prize. Here, I'll write it out. So he does. He writes it out. Grand prize for the championship, 100-meter sprint. He had actually come back to my seat and pinned it on my chest. There, are you happy? You value it, or don't you? I was sore. First, that dirty crack about rich kids, a typical sneer of those who haven't got it. And now this farce. I ripped it off my chest and chucked it at him. Mr. Dubois had looked surprised. It doesn't make you happy? You know darn well I placed fourth. Exactly. The prize for first place is worthless to you because you haven't earned it. But you enjoy a modest satisfaction in placing fourth. You earned it. I trust that some of this word, somnambulists, which are basically like zombie walkers, right? They just walk through life, here understood this little morality play. I fancy that the poet who wrote that song meant to imply that the best things in life, hold on, must be purchased other than with money, which is true, hold on. Just as the literal meaning, sit down. I dismiss you, the bell does not. We have finished the paragraph. Literal meaning of his words is false. The best things in life are beyond money. Their price is agony and sweat and devotion. And the price demanded for the most precious of all things in life is life itself. Ultimate cost for perfect value. Now you are dismissed. You too. You too. Top page 98. We caught up with first period. Woohoo!